Streams of mercy never ceasing, all for songs of loudest praise. Teach me some melodious sonnet, sung by flaming tongues of all. Praise the mountain fixed upon it, Mount of thy redeeming love.
Different nights in different places, but our first official encampment was Sugar Creek, and the second encampment will be here at Richardson's Point. Now, as he directs the people to come here, the land he described it was filled with timber, much like where we are seated. As the saints first came in, he described it as a small group at first. But during those 10 days, Eliza Snow, also a great writer in the church, will describe that Richardson's Point was like a city. And as they came in during the 10 days, they actually established one shop on this land, and it was a blacksmith shop. Now, the reason for the blacksmith shop was to try and fix some of the wagons that had been set up. They also established during the 10 days a post office here, where a post office means they've got a bona fide city. Their postmaster was Willard Richards, a man that had been in Carthage jail with the prophet Joseph Smith, and a member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. Now, how was the 10 days here for the people? For Erastus Snow, he said it was anything but fair conditions. He described the days here as filled with much rain, and said very, very difficult time. Yet there were some real highlights for the people here. One of the advantages of Richardson's Point and stopping was that they once again had a community type of feeling. As a result, many of the men felt they could leave their wife and their children here in Richardson's Point while they went out to get work. So several men left their families here, and they went out to neighboring communities, most of them to chop wood, not to get money for their service, but to get some kind of food that they hadn't packed enough as they had left Nauvoo. Other men used this as a time to return to Nauvoo. And we can name 80 men that left from here, went all the way back to Nauvoo to get their families and to begin crossing, because some of those 80 had left with the original group of Brigham Young. Still, there was another group here called the William Pitts Brass Band. And the brass band would use this as their place where they would stay at night, but then they would go through the day and they would play in such places as Keosauqua, even at the courthouse, and receive money, which was then used to purchase more food. Now, amidst this kind of primitive living conditions, Eliza R. Snow describes that she had a friend that came up to her and offered her a piece of, she said, white bread and butter. She said even the finest bakeries of the time would be rivaled with the bread she was able to eat here. And then she described it was pretty amazing to her to have such an experience when she was in the outdoors and in the wilds. Now, if you were to say, who has stood on the same ground that you're standing on, and I'd say some of the noble and greats. Brigham Young was in this encampment at Richardson's Point. Brigham Young stood 5 feet 10, red hair and freckles, and 46 years old at the time. You'd say also in this encampment then Willard Richards. a man that would testify all the days of his life that he had been in Carthage jail and seen the death then of Joseph Smith and his brother Hiram, that he was here. That Heber C. Kimball and his wife Sarah were here. In fact, she had a child born to her here. So a man that will live to be in the first presidency of the church, he was here. A daughter of Ezra Taft Benson. Ezra Taft Benson was one of the men that welcomed the saints into Quincy, joined the church, becomes a member of the 12. He was here. And then, of course, you get the Littles and the Tanners. James Monroe Tanner was a young baby. He's about 15 months old. He's the son of Sidney Tanner and Louisa. He's going to die from what they called brain inflammation, which is some kind of virus that's going on, a high fever. He's your first to die, and it's March 17th. For his parents, for Louisa, his mother, and his father, James is one of 8 children in their family, and the youngest. For the mother, Louisa, she will make it from Richardson's Point out to Winter Quarters, and she is remembered at the Winter Quarters gravesite because she will die there. So child dies here, mother dies out in Winter Quarters. For the father, Sidney, he will go on to San Bernardino, California, and will become a businessman. He's a freighter by trade, and also becomes pretty famous in the town called Beaver, Utah. But he is most remembered from California for freighting part of the goods and materials that were used in the building of the Salt Lake Tabernacle, and more probably significant, the building of the amazing Mormon Tabernacle Choir organ. Now, the next man to die will be on March 18th. So March 17th is the baby, the first to die at this site. March 18th, as you look at your program, Edwin Zabriskie Little. Brother Little, you'll notice, is 30 years old. He is a nephew of Brigham Young. He's the son of obviously Brigham Young's sister, Susanna, and she is married to Little. Edwin Zabriskie, at the time, age 30, he had married in Nauvoo at the age of 26. So he's 4 years married. He has a wife named Harriet and a young son, George. For him, he will be brought here into Richardson's Point. He is very ill by the time he arrives here. He had helped his Uncle Brigham back at the Mississippi River when the Mississippi River was frozen over, and as they were getting Brigham Young's wagon across the river, the ice will break, and Miss Edwin went under the ice. He is rescued from being under the ice, but he is very chilled. And some people called it lung fever. Others called it congestion, but he will be brought here. As he is brought here in the wagon, it is concluded that there's a doctor about 2 miles away, and he is sent there in the wagon. He is treated, but on the way back from the doctor will die and will be buried here. Now, Lorenzo Snow will write about the coffin in which Edwin is buried in, and will say it's made out of rough lumber that was then, as they cut down a tree here to make the coffin for Brigham Young's nephew. By March 18th, when Brigham Young knows that his nephew has died, and it was in the act of leading the cause of death, his young nephew, age 30, and that it was in the act of helping him, Brigham Young was completely undone. The day before, he'd had the death of an infant, and now he's got the death of a nephew. due to helping him. And for Brigham Young, he could not be consoled. And so on March 18th, you could try to talk to him, but he wasn't in the mood to talk. He was trying to figure this out. He's got thousands of people. He will actually give the funeral on the 18th for both the baby that had died and for his nephew, Edwin. By March 19th, he knows what he's doing, and the day after the funeral, he announces, "We now abandon Richardson's Point." Now, as they abandoned Richardson's Point, they moved on. And obviously, as they move on, as indicated on your sign, Iowa becomes a trail of death for the Latter-day Saints. Not only do you get the young baby, but the mother over there in winter quarters. So with that, obviously we're on holy ground. Holy because of the people that walked here before. Holy because of the deaths of these two great individuals. Now, for most of us, including most of us church historians, you'd say Richardson's Point was something we'd pass over. But there's been one man that I know of that's kept it alive, and it's Leon Wilkinson. In 1995, I'm in Nauvoo, and we're having a founders meeting of the Iowa Mormon Trail. And as we had this founders meeting, the question was, we knew that the wagons we'd be going through again to be able to remember the great sesquicentennial of the Latter-day Saints crossing Iowa. And the question was, how do we keep wandering back and forth to make sure everybody along Highway 2 and different parts are going to remember this? And the conclusion was we needed people to rise up and who lived in the area to help us out. Since 1995, as far as I know, all of those little branches that were formed of the Iowa Mormon Trail have collapsed, except for one here. And I am so grateful. And to some extent, you know, those that have kept it alive so much are those, for the most part, not of our faith. And what they have done for us and our pioneers, to some extent, you know, we need to rise up and match their efforts. Anyway, I'm very grateful for the Cloak family for their willingness to put up a beautiful fence to allow us to remember and to remember this wonderful day. I'd like to close by sharing with you my feelings about my ancestry that also crossed through this area. I didn't have any ancestors that you'd say you could remember their last names. We've always been pretty good followers. We're yet to rise up to be leaders, but anyway, pretty good followers. You know, they have an Indian chief, you gotta have Indians, right? And I can remember as a child, my grandmother lived with us, and one of her jobs was to put me to bed at night. And I'd say, Grandma, tell me a story. And I really wanted to hear about Snow White, you know, 7 dwarfs, you know, wanted to hear, you know, you marry and you live happily ever after, you know, the Prince Charming. I love those. And my grandmother would say, I can only tell you stories that are true. And if you want to hear something true, you can stay awake. Well, she told me about these incredible pioneers, including those that came through Iowa. And suddenly they were bigger to me than any action figure you can imagine, you know, because they were such heroes. I view it as a great honor to be able to be part of this wonderful program, and a great honor to be associated with you in remembering the first two that gave their lives on the Great Mormon Trail. And I say this in Jesus' name, amen.